Good to see some familiar faces here. And as Christian said, this is our second go around with this. The first one we felt was pretty well received, and we were able to hopefully answer a lot of questions and get some good feedback from it as well. So we thought for the time being, we're going to try to do this maybe the first Wednesday of every month and see how things go. There's still obviously a lot of unknown questions out there about how the 2020 and 2021 academic year and sports seasons are going to fall out, but this will give us an opportunity to answer any questions you may have, and then also for us to kind of let you know where we are as a conference with things. First and foremost, though, and I'm not sure if she is on the call, but today is Brittany Olaf's birthday. And Brittany is our Director of Strategic Communications, so we would like to wish her a happy 24th birthday. And she's been a great addition to our office, and we look forward to working with her again. So Brittany, if you're not on and you watch the replay, hope you've had a great birthday. Secondly, obviously, what's been going on around the country with the social unrest has been very, weighing on a lot of our minds and hearts heavily. And I don't want to make this call about that at all, but if you didn't see our statement as a conference yesterday, I will go ahead and read it. The South Atlantic Conference and all of its member institutions are committed to the principle of diversity and inclusion and support every person of color. We will neither tolerate nor ignore racism of any kind, and will continue to ensure that all of our student athletes, coaches, and staff are able to learn, participate in their respective sports, and work in a safe and welcoming environment. The SAC joins its brothers and sisters in higher education to assure we are agents of awareness and change to make our society more just and equal. So I will leave that situation with that, but I think everyone, I've seen a lot of similar remarks from our member institutions, and hopefully we all are on the same page with that. So now where we are with COVID-19 and the opening of our member institutions and the start of the fall season and going into the winter and then next spring. At the risk of sounding like Mayor Vaughn from Jaws, for those of you that have seen that movie, we will be open for business. Hopefully we won't do it as haphazardly as Mayor Vaughn did, but we will be open for business. Our schools across the 4 states that we're in have been working diligently and very hard to have students back on campus this fall. Therefore, we do plan on having college athletics within the South Atlantic Conference this fall. Will it look like what it has looked like in the past? Absolutely not. It's going to be very different. I don't think there's any question that COVID-19 is a dance partner that we're going to have to live with for the next several months, if not longer than that. So we are going to have to deal with it, and that's what our schools have been addressing. Whether, how they've been handling their return to campus, return to sports, etc. Our athletic directors have been meeting weekly. Our presidents have been meeting weekly. Compliance folks have been meeting weekly. The athletic trainers have been meeting not weekly, but on a very regular basis. And I have a feeling we're going to ramp that up pretty soon once we have a more clear direction of where everyone is from a start standpoint within our conference. And when I say working hard to make sure we're open, that's testing protocols, handling situations if someone does test positive, how we handle that, making sure the venues are, sanitized, safe for return, things of that nature. So each school is probably handling it a little bit differently. That's one thing that I'm not sure we're going to be able to mandate across the board. We might be able to have some minimum standards, but each school is going to have to handle that on their own as far as what the state and local guidelines and even the federal guidelines are mandating for a safe return to campus. On our last call, we talked a lot about the minimums and maximum sport contests that the NCAA was looking to adjust, and they did end up adjusting those. So we have minimum standards that our institutions will need to meet that are less than normal to be considered a sport that they sponsor, and also to be considered eligible for NCAA championships. In addition to that, they have set maximums, which are less than the normal maximums that teams can play across all sports for the 2020-21 academic year only. And I can't stress that enough. This is a one-year thing. If they want to do it for longer than that, and when I say they, I mean us as a membership, want to do it longer than that, we have to go through the normal legislative process. This was an emergency situation that the Management Council and Division II President's Council addressed. So the maximums have been reduced as well. And that is more of a cost-cutting measure for 1 year, as well as trying to limit as much travel, especially across regions and states, et cetera, from that standpoint. So with that in mind, our conference has committed to playing the full conference schedule that was already slated, with the exception of basketball. And the reason we've had to adjust basketball is because we had initially we had a 24-game conference schedule, and the maximum number of games that teams can now play in Division II is 22. So we have adjusted the schedule, and we're presenting it to the ADs tomorrow. In fact, as soon as this call is over, Christian and I finalized it late this afternoon, and I'm going to send it to the ADs, and I'm hoping they'll send it to their coaches for some feedback. But it's a 20-game schedule. Obviously, you're not playing everybody twice. It's a schedule. We've got every team has two what we call rivals, which are based on proximity, that you play home and home. And then just sort of randomly, you've got 6 teams that you're playing home and home. And then you have 2 teams you play home only, and 2 teams you play away only. And our hope is that this is a 1-year deal for us. We'll go back to the 24-game schedule next year. And so we'll all just sort of have to live with it for this year. Every other sport, though, has the ADs have committed to playing the full conference schedule. We're hoping that the cost-cutting measures that may need to be adjusted can be done in the non-conference if necessary. But in an effort to make sure that our conference remains strong and viable, we will play the full conference schedule in every sport. We've in this week, as a matter of fact, we've started getting some information that the NCAA Division II governance structure is looking at potentially adjusting the fall championship schedule. And that's going to be a little bit of a challenge if it happens. It is just in a conversation phase right now. Absolutely nothing has been decided. And at least from my standpoint, because it just happened, I haven't had the chance to get any real feedback from our athletic directors or presidents. But from my standpoint, I am more interested in what we can do as a conference. We need to control what we can control, and we can control our regular season conference play and our championships. And if for some reason they don't coincide with NCAA championships this fall, then I don't know if that's in the best interest of the overall conference to sacrifice potentially 11, 10, 12 schools for 1, 2, or 3 to play in the postseason. We've got to make sure that our schools have a viable conference season to participate in, because there's no secret that our schools are reliant on that enrollment. And if our student athletes don't feel like they're getting a full conference participation experience, that could hurt the enrollment. That could hurt their desire to come back. It could hurt their desire to even participate this year. They may redshirt and then come back another year, or the following year, which could add more financial stress on the member institution. They could transfer to another conference or whatever. So we are trying to focus on making our conference season in all sports, but in particular right now the fall, because that's the first season upon us, as strong as possible. In addition to that, we do have a cost-cutting ad hoc committee that has been put together, and they've been working on all sorts of things, championship adjustments, which there haven't been too many significant ones, because again, the focus has been trying to, if we have to cut additional costs, we need to do that in the non-conference space as opposed to the conference space. And then, we're going to be having probably most, if not all, of our administrative and coaches meetings in this sort of a forum, virtual, to save some cost. We've adjusted some of the officiating things to help the schools with some cost. Fortunately, the NCAA is going to be more lenient this coming year with the conference grant money that we're able to receive from the association and how it is spent. So that will help the member institutions move that money around a little more freely to where they need to be. So again, we are continuing to work to try to save costs, but also make this experience as less disruptive and traumatic for our student athletes, coaches, and staff as possible. So, Christian, I don't know if we've got any questions yet, but that's pretty much it for an opening statement.
Well, thank you, Commissioner Britz. We do have one question so far. Harris Hellberg has asked, have any of the member schools put out a plan to return or not to return for the fall? If yes, how does that affect the seasons?
If that's for the academic year, the only one that I've seen that's somewhat official, they did do it. I don't want to call them out just in case it's not official, but it was officially sent to me. They're going to be starting about a week early than they originally scheduled. They're going to forego fall break. They're going to forego Labor Day as a holiday, and they will end before Thanksgiving. They will be done with their fall semester. Now, I can't remember if they're going to have finals the week before they head out or if they're going to be done remotely the week after. But that seems to be sort of the trend that a lot of our schools are leaning toward right now. And that seems to be a pretty popular trend nationally as well. As I think I've seen some Division I schools announce that already. I think South Carolina, Notre Dame, just to name a few, have already announced a similar schedule to that. So to answer your question, how that's going to impact the fall season, it should not impact it at all. The main season that may disrupt is the winter season. And when I say disrupt, I don't mean it will hurt it in any way. It's just we're going to have to be creative from a scheduling standpoint, because the presidents are pretty adamant that the one thing they don't want is for student athletes and students, for that matter, to be traveling and coming back to campus on a pretty consistent basis. So that's part of the reason for eliminating the fall break, and it's also part of the reason that they don't want them going home for Thanksgiving and then returning for 10 to 12 days. And potentially, contracting or spreading the virus during that time. So we're going to have a pretty long, extensive break in between the fall and the spring semester. But in order to get our basketball season in, there's going to have to be some games scheduled during that time. So, we'll try to limit that as much as we can, but to avoid, when they come back, having to play 3 games a week for 4 or 5 weeks, which I don't think anyone thinks that would be a good situation. There's going to have to be some games scheduled during that time. And obviously there's a cost to that, because when dorms are closed and dining facilities are closed, there's a cost to housing those teams. So we're aware of that, but I think pretty much everyone understands that in order to get the full season in, that's really your only option.
Thank you, Commissioner. We do have the next question from Jason Savage. We've seen a few Division I schools cut some sports to save money. What is the conference's policy if that happens to one of the member schools?
We don't really have a policy per se about that. Our policy basically is you have to sponsor the majority of the sports that we have as a championship, and that we have championships for. Fortunately, most of our schools have done that. Without getting into too much of my sports business teaching background here, what Division I is having to deal with right now is years and years of overspending, and they just don't have any sort of reserve to cover this. They are solely dependent on a couple of sports, and I'll use Conference USA and Sunbelt as a great example. They have they've moved conferences. A lot of their schools have moved conferences for football, and the Olympic sports have sort of suffered from that standpoint, from the travel expenses and things of that nature. I'll take credit for it. I think one of my favorite lines is the only thing more ridiculous than going from Morgantown, West Virginia to Lubbock, Texas to play a volleyball match is going from Miami, Florida to South Bend, Indiana to do the same exact thing. And that's what's happening. And from a cost standpoint, a lot of those mid-majors and smaller Division I's are just not able to do that in some of those sports. So to answer your question, though, we haven't heard any South Atlantic Conference schools expressing the need or interest to cut sports. So that's good. I think it goes back to what I mentioned earlier, that a lot of our schools, if not the majority, or if not all of them, are, they're dependent on that enrollment. So if you're cutting a sport, you're probably going to cut whatever number of student athletes right off the bat from your enrollment. So a little bit different scenario than Division I.
All right, thank you, sir. This next one from Matt Finley. Is there any talk about moving winter sports to one semester spring schedules only? So basketball, wrestling, or swimming?
So just playing all of those in the spring?
Yes. Sorry, I muted myself before I was answering you. Yes, that's the question. Basically, or is there any talk of moving winter to just the spring?
Not at our conference, but I know there are some other conferences around the country talking about that. There's even some conversation, which I think is just totally out there, of not having a fall season at all and having all the fall, winter, and spring sports played in the spring. And clearly people thinking about that have never worked on a campus in either event management or athletic training or sports information. So I'm not sure how realistic that is. But again, Matt, all this stuff is fluid. So, 2 months from now, we may be having a completely different conversation. But at this time, no, there has not been any conversation about that for us.
Thank you, sir. Next one is from Chuck Bittner. Is the conference considering eliminating out-of-conference games for all sports to reduce travel time and expense?
Good to see you, Chuck. Thanks for joining. At this time, no, Chuck. The cost-cutting committee and the ADs, for that matter, have kind of left that up to each school to manage. If they feel the need that they need to reduce or eliminate non-conference games, then they need to do that. But there hasn't been any push to mandate that across the conference, just because I think we're fortunate. We have quite a few of our schools that have very, very short trips to some non-conference teams. So we don't want to force them not to do it if they can make a 30-minute trip to play a non-conference game.
Thank you, sir. You have answered all the questions currently, so got some. I got one. All right, sorry. I spoke too soon. This one coming from Mr. Sam Hyman. What is the general testing protocol for the athletes, coaches, and other essential workers at games?
That's a great question, and one that we haven't finalized yet. And as I mentioned earlier, I don't know if we're going to have like a consistent protocol across the conference. Each school is handling that on their own. I'm sure at some point we will review all of those and make sure that everyone feels comfortable with that. But there will be some sort of protocol in place for every school. I'm just not sure if we're going to be able to mandate it across the board. And part of that is because we're in 4 different states, and what North Carolina may be mandating may not be the same as South Carolina or Virginia. So it's a little slippery slope there. But I think at a bare minimum, what we're going to do, and I'm sure probably in the next couple of weeks, we're going to start working very heavily with our athletic trainers and our team physicians to start finding out what the specific protocols are for each one of our schools and share those across the conference so everyone at least has those. and make sure that what the expectations are for teams traveling to those various schools are.
Thank you, sir. So that is answered all the questions so far. Does anybody?
One other thing that, when we get back to the travel, some of the things that have, been talked about now too, is a lot of our schools are going to be, and it's not just our schools, but across the country, they're going to be limited from a bus standpoint on what their charter company allows. So if their charter company only allows 50% capacity on a bus, then that's going to dictate how they travel, how many they travel. If they have to charter more buses, then that drives up the cost as well. We got word yesterday in one of our meetings that one of our schools is currently budgeting in the range of $10,000 a month for sanitizer to be put across campus, and the dorms, classrooms, dining facilities, etc. So that's a line item that most people probably never thought they would have to put, and then at that high dollar amount as well. So there's all sorts of things that are going to drive up the cost. So we're trying to figure out ways that we can creatively cut them, again, without reducing the experience of the student athletes.
Thank you, Commissioner Britz. Does anybody else have any questions at this time?
I will tell everyone we have tentatively scheduled an in-person meeting with our presidents on June 23rd. We're going to be very socially distant in that meeting. I think someone sent me a picture of the room, and I think we can each be about 25 feet from each other. So that will be good. But I know that they were very interested in meeting in person to cover a lot of the areas that we've talked about so far, and also address some of the normal business stuff that we need to handle as a conference. And one of the things that we're addressing right now is this coming year, we're going to be at 13 schools when Limestone becomes an official member in about 3.5 weeks. One of the things that we're very interested in trying to do is maybe get a 14th school to get an even number and get 2 groups of 7 from a divisional standpoint, potentially in certain sports. So so we're working on that, as well as just other normal conference business, that you have to manage. Everyone thinks that everything has stopped with this, and unfortunately it hasn't. One of the things that we're dealing with as a division and association is the name, image, and likeness that I'm sure most of you have heard about or read about. And that train is still moving quickly down the track. So even though the world has stopped basically from a live sports standpoint, things that are facing our member institutions and the division and association still continue on. So the presidents wanted to meet in person, so we're going to try to make it happen. And it will be strange, but it will also be nice not to be staring at a computer screen for 5 hours, 6 hours, however long that meeting is.
Thanks, Commissioner. We did have another question come in again from Chuck. You mentioned that there will be changes to the fall championship schedules. Do you know when we may expect announcements from the NCAA regarding these changes?
And Chuck, if I said that, I misspoke. They are discussing potential changes. There hasn't been anything final yet. And I think the timeline, if there are changes to finalize, though, is by the end of the month, if those do get adjusted. And I don't think they're adjusted too much. It might be 2 weeks here or there. But that is certainly one thing that it just started the discussion, and it's kind of caught a lot of us off guard. We actually have a commissioners meeting with all the Division II commissioners this Friday and next Monday, And I'm sure that will be a huge topic of discussion, and I might have a little more information after that. But at this time, nothing has been determined or even proposed formally right now for adjusting fall championships.
Thank you, sir. One more question from Sam. Is there any update on fans being allowed in games or not?
Again, that's going to be a lot up to the school and the state and local guidelines. I know our schools have started addressing this for sure. I think they want to allow fans into the games. I think it's obviously a lot more, it's a lot easier to contemplate this for outdoor sports like soccer and field hockey and football. Volleyball is going to be a little bit of a challenge, as well as basketball when it rolls around. But the outdoor sports, I know they're pretty. I think most of our schools are pretty optimistic that there will be fans permitted. The question is going to be what equipment will be needed, protective equipment will be required. How will they be able to socially distance everyone? And I don't think that we're going to get to a point where we're testing people to come into a game, but who knows at this point if that's going to happen. But we did have a presentation from McMillan Pasden Smith, which is one of our corporate partners. They're an architecture firm that works a lot with our schools, and they had a presentation on some potential ways to handle that as far as flow of people in and out, and then how you can seat people and keep them socially distanced. If you want to require masks, you can provide them, although we have heard that some schools have been advised not to hand out masks because then there's a liability that you're handing them the mask, and if something happens, now you're liable for it. Gotta love attorneys. Sorry if there's any on the call right now. So there has been discussion, but again, I think, we're basically 3 months away from the first actual contest. So nothing final at this point, but I know the discussions have started on how to properly allow fans back into the games.
And Commissioner Britz, I'll piggyback off that just to say that next week we have a meeting with all our media relations directors, and one of the topics is going to be trying to enhance our video streams, knowing that there's a good chance that fans won't be allowed in some of our venues, to make those video streams better for everybody. So even if you can't watch the games live in person, the hope is that you'll be able to watch them streamed a little bit better even than you were already. So we do have one more question, and this will probably wrap us up here. This one coming from Rob Perrin. Is there a stable insurance policy for the Division I basketball tournament TV contract?
Wow. Wasn't expecting that one. I think, we had one for this past year, which thankfully helped us a little bit. I think if we don't have that tournament again next year, I'm not sure if there's an insurance policy that will cover that. I will definitely do some digging on that, Rob, and see where we are. But I don't know off the top of my head. But I do have a feeling if at the Division I level, let's put it this way, at the Division I level, if they are unable to have that college football playoff, coupled with the men's basketball championship that was canceled this past year, they're going to be in a world of hurt. And if we as a division, because financially we are extremely dependent on the Division I men's basketball tournament, if that doesn't happen again this coming season, we are going to be in a world of hurt. But I know they have an insurance policy. I don't know how well it will be managed if it happens 2 years in a row, but I will definitely jot something down and see if I can't find something out for you, Rob.
Thank you, sir. And I will. I'll throw you one more. We had one last question.
I've got time. I got nothing to do right now. So that's fine.
This one is from Christine Corver. In order to accommodate fans at volleyball, would seating behind the benches possibly be allowed?
Absolutely, Christine. That conversation has already been taking place, and I think the one thing, if we do that, what we'll probably do is just limit it to parents, not have students sitting behind the benches. And then the other thing that, at least my own personal opinion, I wouldn't want fans switching back and forth when the